Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing the album Crafty by the band Happy the Man.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So before we get into this album, this video is dedicated to Civil Ian. He celebrated his birthday just 3 days ago, so if you see his comment down in the comments, tell him a happy birthday. And he also just released an EP called The Bridge, which is filled with amazing progressive soundscapes, which I personally really enjoy, so if you can go, you should check that out. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this review, Ian, and again, happy birthday. Now let's move on to some of my favorite bits from this album. So Happy the Man are an American prog band which are considered to be quite the anomaly amongst their peers due to the fact that their sound mostly resembles the prog of the UK. Despite forming in the thriving year of 1972, they only released their debut album in the year of 1977, a time in which progressive rock was already starting to sift out of the mainstream culture. But despite that, their debut album was enough of a success to grant them the chance of making a second release, so the year after, in 1978, they released their second album, which is the one we are reviewing today, called Crafty. Now personally, I know their debut album and that's the only one I know from them, and I really quite like that album, so getting into this second album I came with high spirits, looking for something really good and expecting the best. And while both albums have their fair share of similarities, I can't help to see Crafty as the better constructed one of the two. Now before I move on into the midst of the review, I would like to address something that I said beforehand, and that's the fact that this band, Happy the Man, are some sort of an anomaly in American progressive rock. Now generally I would have to say that the sound of Happy the Man does kind of resemble bands like Gentle Giant or even Camel, but the only reason I'm even bringing this point forward is because they do actually have a very unique and well-defined sound of their own, but I wanted to tell you all that at least there is some similarities to UK prog because their sound is really unlike anything that you'd find in America and a bit like what you might find in the UK. Personally, if I really had to generalize, this album particularly and the way that the instruments and the vocals are being used on here, it sort of feels like if Gentle Giant just used the main four instruments that are found in rock bands, being of course a guitar, a bass, drums and keyboards, and only used various other instruments as sort of flourishes but not as main leading instruments. Now personally, when I listened to this album, I was in the perfect mood for it. I just landed a few hours ago from my flight to Berlin and I was now taking a bus from Berlin to Frankfurt, which was an overnight bus. My head was buzzing, there was a lot that was going on and I really needed to shut down, so I put on this album and reviewed it on its way, and somehow it just really went well with actually, dozing off, but in a very good way, in an appreciative way, and in not a single moment did I actually found myself really zoning out from this album. Now this album generally does go quite easy on the listener. It is made out of 8 individual tracks, most of them short or medium length, and each of the tracks make for one contained piece, and then when come together you of course get a very colorful album. And while I do feel like a lot of this album is basically just your good old progressive meandering, I don't think that this is a bad thing in this case. It really does sound good, it is enjoyable, each and every track features its own new thing, nothing is really that repetitive, and I don't know, I just really found that to be very, very fun. Now personally, if there's one thing that I really enjoyed on this album and generally in Happy the Man's music that I know is the very unique sounds that their instruments have. Each and every one of them sounds like the instrument itself, but in a way that you'd never really expect, and I think that the main keyword here is timbre. Everything sounds special, unique, and it doesn't actually have to do with the filters, and I think this is mostly down to actually analog variations. I don't really know, I am not a scientist, I have really no idea, but for some reason Happy the Man have this very unique sound, especially on the keyboards, that I've never heard recreated with another band's music. Personally, I will note out that I wasn't really a big fan of the scarce vocals that are to be found on this album. To me at least, they felt like some sort of 2 cent Peter Gabriel, but in all honesty, scarce they are and they don't really feature a lot in this album, thus I wasn't really bothered by them. Personally, I really enjoy tracks like EB It Is or Wind Up All Day With, which I hope I pronounced correctly. I also really enjoyed I Forgot to Push It, but if there's one song that I believe is better than all the rest, it has to be the track Morning Sun. This piece on its surface doesn't really feel hard to digest. You can really listen to it, you can enjoy it and move on from it, but as I listened to it once and then twice and then more times, I realized how many nuances there are to be found on this song. It is filled with intricate little details that when all come together form this one magnificent song which really flows to me and always feels like something good to listen to. And all in all, this was a very enjoyable album. It was really in the right place at the right time when I had the mood for it, and thus I really enjoyed it more than that, but I did give it another listen since then and I found this album to be very enjoyable even in other settings. But that's all that I really can say about this album. I do have quite the surface level acquaintance with Happy the Man or their music, so I really don't know what else to say. Of course, if you want to elaborate more, Ian, you can do so down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say, because this is again your favorite album of all time, at least as you mentioned it, so I'd really love to know more about it. This album cover is just fantastic. On the one hand, it does feel like the first album's cover, but on the other hand, they really don't look the same at all. The usage of colors, shading, shapes on here are just terrific, and in some way, I feel like I'm underestimating the abilities of graphic designers back in the 70s, but this really feels ahead of its time. There is something very calming and natural about this cover as well as just feeling very balanced despite not being entirely symmetrical. It just feels very balanced, and the composition on here is great, and that's only exemplified by the use or the great integration of the text on here, which is just lovely. This cover kind of feels to me like what I want my videos to be like. So well made, but also so well seamlessly made that you don't even notice the amount of effort and thought that is put into them. But yeah, this cover put into one word is just simply beautiful. So yeah, thank you for the recommendation, Ian. 'Tis a good album and it really does deserve the rating of 8 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Lumpy Gravy by Frank Zappa, an artist which we haven't visited on this channel for so long, since we basically stopped doing the live streams. But of course, I want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon. So thank you so much to Clay Wallum, Rest of Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are the best. And if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.